Thank you, Joe. Thank you very, very much. Thank you to INSS for inviting me. Obviously, I'm delighted to be here and to present these data. I should tell you that the cover of our report is a picture of an American flag that's been doctored to replace one of the stars with a Jewish star. And it's an arresting image, but it's also a mathematically accurate image. Jewish people in the United States represent about 2% of the American population. 1 in 50 stars is 2%. So 1 star on the cover, 2% of the population. That means for survey purposes that if we interview people in the general public, for every 100 interviews we do, we're going to be discarding 98. We're looking for that small 2%. That's one reason why doing surveys of a tiny population like Jews in the United States is methodologically very complex and also extremely expensive and time-consuming. And it is only due to the generosity of the Pew Charitable Trust and the Neubauer Family Foundation, thank you, Joe and Jeanette, that we were able to do it. Because surveys like this are complex and expensive, they have tended to be few and far between. As Joe suggested, this survey was done in 2013. The previous one, done by the Jewish community itself and paid for by the Jewish community, had been done in 2000, 2001, and before that there were surveys in 1990 and 1970. Making comparisons between these surveys is complex because of methodological differences. I will tell you right off that the question that before us for this session, which is American Jewry moving away from Israel, question mark, that question mark is important. In our survey, as best we can, when we try to compare it with previous surveys on some key attitudes and attachments to Israel, we see little change over time overall. For the entire U.S. Jewish population, at present, about 2/3 say they're either emotionally attached or very emotionally attached to the State of Israel. That is about the same as it was in 2000, 2001. So on a kind of very initial first blush look, we do not see that the U.S. Public has distanced itself from Israel, the U.S. Jewish public. However, there are some important ways in which the American Jewish population is different, and probably most tellingly, younger Jews in the United States, while no less religiously observant than older Jews, are less attached to the State of Israel. And we'll see that in numerous of our data here across more than a dozen questions in the survey about attitudes toward Israel. When I tell you that younger Jews are less emotionally attached to Israel than older Jews, I suspect I know what's going through your minds. I suspect that you're thinking it's political. It has to do with the peace process, settlements, and so on. That may well be part of it, but I also want to explore some of what are the deeper sociological issues here, some of the changes in the way that American Jews identify as Jewish and what being Jewish means to Americans. I think what we're going to see overall is that American Jews increasingly, especially among younger Jews, identify as Jewish but not with Judaism as a religion. And increasingly, American Jews are intermarried. In younger generations of American Jews, very high percentages of children who are intermarried. And so the question is not just whether younger Jews are moving away from Israel, but whether they were ever attached to Israel to begin with. Quickly, a word about the survey. This was a telephone survey done by cell phones and landlines with calls made in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. Actually, we made hundreds of thousands of phone calls. We completed more than 70,000 interviews with the general public. We were not working from lists of distinctive Jewish names or from people identified with synagogues. We began with a survey of the general public in the United States. From those 70,000, we identified more than 5,100 who could be considered Jewish in some way, and about 3,500 whom, for our purposes, we classify as Jewish. They fall into two main categories: those who answer an initial question about their religion by saying that they are Jewish. People who identify their religion as Jewish, we call Jews by religion. But we also wanted to capture a broader group of American Jews, those who might colloquially be called secular or cultural or ethnic Jews. These are people who answer the first question by saying that they are atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular religiously, but who also tell us that they do consider themselves Jewish aside from religion, and who tell us they have at least one Jewish parent. And we call this second group Jews of no religion, because in answer to the religion question, they said essentially that they have none. Now, comparing this survey to other surveys is difficult, but just in the data from this survey alone, we can see, by looking at Jews by generation, some evidence of change over time. When we look at Jews in the greatest generation, the generation that fought the Second World War, just 7% identify in that category of people who say their religion is atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, but who call themselves Jews. More than 90%, 9 out of 10 Jews in that generation, identify with Judaism as a religion. Now, in my generation, the boomer generation, about 1 in 5 Jews tell us they have no particular religion. 8 in 10 identify as Jews by religion. In the millennial generation, fully a third of Jews do not identify with Judaism as a religion. Again, it means when we ask them what their religion is, they do not say Judaism. Even though they have a Jewish parent, they have no other religion, and they tell us that they consider themselves Jewish aside from religion. Now, this group, Jews of no religion, is not surprisingly less religious than Jews by religion. But in addition to being less religious, Jews of no religion are also less connected to Jewish communities in the United States and to Israel by very stark numbers. So on some initial questions like, are you proud to be Jewish? Overwhelmingly, Jews by religion and Jews of no religion say yes. But when we ask about, do you have a strong sense of belonging to the Jewish people? And do you have a special responsibility to care for fellow Jews in need around the world? We suddenly begin to find that by a 2-to-1 margin, or that Jews by religion are twice as likely as Jews of no religion to say yes. And when we look at synagogue membership, participation in other Jewish organizations, and Jewish philanthropy, Jews of no religion are considerably lower than Jews by religion. In addition, Jews of no religion are raising their children differently. We asked the individual respondents in our survey who have minor children in the home a battery of questions about how they're raising those children. And we gave them the option of telling us that they're raising those children in the Jewish faith, or that they're raising their children partly in the Jewish faith, that they're raising their children as Jewish but not in the Jewish faith, and that they're not raising their children Jewish in any way. Now, when we look at Jews by religion, overwhelmingly, more than 9 in 10 are raising their children Jewish in some way. 71% are raising them strictly in the Jewish faith. An additional 15% is partly Jewish by religion, an additional 7% as either cultural Jews or in some mix. And only 7% are not raising their children Jewish. We look at Jews of no religion, we see that fully 2/3 are not raising their children Jewish in any way, not just in the Jewish faith, but they're also not raising their children as cultural or ethnic Jews, which obviously raises the question of whether they are transmitting any Jewish identity on to the next generation. And this phenomenon is clearly bound up as well with intermarriage, and we describe it in our report as a circular, reinforcing relationship. Exactly where the cart is and where the horse is difficult to say, but Jews by religion are less likely to be intermarried than Jews of no religion. Jews of no religion are more likely to be intermarried and more likely to be raising their children as Jews of no religion, who are themselves then, the children, again, more likely to intermarry. When we look at intermarriage, we see that Jews in our survey who have a fellow Jewish spouse, 96% of them are raising their children Jewish by marriage. Jewish by religion. And among Jews who have a non-Jewish spouse, a majority, more than 60%, are raising their children Jewish in some way. A quarter are raising them as Jewish partly by religion, 20% as Jewish by religion, 16% in some kind of mix, but about a third are not raising their children Jewish in any way. Intermarriage also appears to be rising. We can see this clearly again in our data. This is not comparing this survey to previous surveys, but just looking at the data by year of marriage. Among Jews in our survey who got married before 1970, 17% have a non-Jewish spouse. Among those who've gotten married since 2000, it's pushing 6 in 10 have a non-Jewish spouse. There's virtually no intermarriage among Orthodox Jews in the United States. So if you take these figures from 2000 and you take Orthodox Jews out of it, among non-Orthodox Jews since 2000, 72% are intermarried. Consequently, with the rise of intermarriage, we have a dramatic rise as well in the children of intermarriage. In the silent generation, among Jews, nearly 9 in 10 had 2 Jewish parents. In Generation X, still 3/4 of Jews in that generation had 2 Jewish parents. But among millennials, those who began to come of age around the year 2000, it's half and half. 48% have a Jewish parent, 48% have 2 Jewish parents. Now, I don't want you to have strictly the impression that intermarriage is clearly leading to some sort of dilution of the Jewish people in the United States, because the figures are rather interesting. Back in the greatest generation, most Jews who had 1 Jewish parent as adults were not Jewish. 75% did not identify with Judaism. And that means that they either identify with another religion, mainly Christians, or they positively tell us that they don't consider themselves Jewish in any way, either by religion or aside from religion. In the latest generation of younger Jewish adults, those under the age of 30 today, it's fully a majority of those who have 1 Jewish parent who today identify as Jewish. But about half of them identify as Jews by religion, and about half identify as Jews of no religion. I'm going to skip over a bunch of fertility slides that essentially are showing you that the Orthodox are growing at a much higher rate than other Jews, and religious switching, which shows you that Jews are moving down the ladder of traditionalism from Orthodox to conservative to Reform and then out. And I want to talk a little bit about the heart of the survey, which is about what being Jewish means to Jews in America today. We asked people, we said in the survey, that we're interested in what being Jewish means to you personally. We said, we'd like you please to tell us which of these 9 items that we're about to give you is essential to what being Jewish means to you personally, which is important but not essential, and which is not important. And here on this slide, I'm just showing the percentage who said that each of these items is essential. We're just 1 day past the Holocaust Remembrance Day. Interesting to note that the item that the most Jews said was essential to them, of the 9 items that we gave them, was remembering the Holocaust. 73% of Jews said that's essential to what being Jewish means to them. Followed closely by leading an ethical and moral life and working for justice and equality. I think you'll note that twice as many Jews said having a good sense of humor is important to them, as said observing Jewish law is important to them, essential to them. I think you'll also note that while Jews of no religion were less likely to state that every one of these items is essential to them, they ranked them in roughly the same order, with one exception. Did you spot the exception? Caring about Israel. Jews of no religion, less likely to say that caring about Israel is essential to them. And remember, more Jews of no religion among younger Jews than among older Jews. Getting back to the issue of why are younger Jews less attached to the state of Israel? Now, when we look at this by age, we see that younger Jews are less likely to rank all 9 of these items as essential than older Jews are. But once again, interestingly, they rank them in roughly the same order, with, again, one exception, and that exception is caring about Israel. When we look at this battery by denomination or stream of Judaism, we see that there are some interesting differences. I'm just going to point a couple of them out to you. I want you to look at the difference between the ultra-Orthodox and the modern Orthodox when it comes to Israel. There's a more than 30 percentage point difference. The ultra-Orthodox in our survey are defined as those who identify as either Hasidic or Yeshivish. The Hasidic group in particular is low on measures of caring about Israel. The Yeshivish group looks much like the modern Orthodox, actually, on this measure. And when we look at demographic measures, birth rates, etc., it's particularly the Hasidic and the Yeshivish who are growing most rapidly. Okay, overall, as I mentioned right at the outset, 2/3 of American Jews say they are either very attached or somewhat attached to the state of Israel, and that is roughly what we've seen in the past. But Jews of no religion are much less attached to the state of Israel. They're also less likely to have been to Israel. Overall, 43% of American Jews tell us that they've been to Israel, including 23% who tell us they've been more than once. A plurality of American Jews, fully 44% overall, tell us that they consider the continuing construction of settlements in Israel to be hurtful to Israel's own security. We also see among younger Jews even higher percentages who consider it to be hurtful to Israel's own security. And when we look at belief in that God gave Israel to the Jewish people, 40% of American Jews overall say they believe God gave Israel to the Jewish people. By the way, among American Christians, it's 55%. Among white evangelical Christians, it's 82%. White evangelical Christians are twice as likely as American Jews to say God gave Israel to the Jewish people. Now, what I've said about younger Jews being less attached to Israel is notwithstanding what seems to be the discernible impact of Taglit birthright. Younger Jews are just as likely as older Jews to tell us that they've been on a trip to Israel. That notwithstanding the fact that they're younger, they've been around less long, presumably have less money, less opportunity to travel to Israel. So the fact that they are just as likely as older Jews to have been to Israel is quite significant. Fully 21% of the younger Jews have been on a Taglit birthright trip. And we do see in our data that having been on a trip to Israel is correlated with stronger attachment to Israel, more positive views of the Israeli government, and so on. However, we can't prove causality, so we don't know for sure whether those who are more attached to Israel are more likely to travel to Israel, or whether those who've traveled to Israel are more attached to Israel, or some of both. But I would say that the data here are consistent with the hypothesis that Taglit birthright has had a net positive impact in driving attitudes of younger Jews to be more positive toward Israel. We can't prove that from the survey, but we're certainly not disproving it. What we're seeing here is consistent with that position. This is a little bit of a complicated slide, asks you to do a little mental math. I know it's after lunch and you're in a dark room and mental math is maybe tough. So let me help you out a little bit. If you look at the 18 to 29-year-old category and you add up the percent who say they're either somewhat attached or very attached, you get 60%. If you take the 65 plus category and add up the very attached and the somewhat attached, you get 79%. Similarly, if you look at the other side of the coin, among younger Jews, those under the age of 30, it's pushing 4 in 10 who tell us that they're either not very attached or not at all attached to the State of Israel, whereas among those over the age of 65, it's just 21%. We ask a question in the survey about support for Israel, and the way we ask this is the U.S. policy toward Israel too supportive, not supportive enough, or about right? And we find that younger Jews are at least 3 times more likely than older Jews to say that the U.S. is too supportive of Israel. Younger Jews are more likely than older Jews, if anything, and more likely than Jews as a whole to say that they do think that there is a way for Israel and an independent Palestinian state to coexist peacefully. Jews are also more optimistic on this in general than the U.S. public, though you'll note some interesting differences by stream of Judaism, with a general pattern that generally speaking, as you move up the ladder of traditionalism, you find less optimism about peaceful coexistence with a Palestinian state. We also see overall that only about 4 in 10 American Jews think that the Israeli government is making a sincere effort to bring about a peace settlement with the Palestinians. Even fewer, just 12%, think the Palestinian leadership is making a sincere effort. When we look at younger Jews, we see even higher percentages who say that the Israeli government is not making a sincere effort, and slightly higher percentages of younger Jews who think the Palestinian leadership is making a sincere effort to bring about a peace settlement. I'm going to close it with that, but again leave you with this final thought. Part of what may be driving the younger Jewish population in the United States to be less attached to Israel may in fact be political. It may reflect views of the peace process and settlements and skepticism about the Israeli government. But you also bear in mind that younger Jews are less likely to identify as Jewish by religion and less likely to be involved in the Jewish community, to say that being Jewish say that being part of a Jewish community is essential to them, and they are more likely to be children of intermarriage than any previous generation of American Jews. Sergio Della Pergola, an eminent demographer, I'm sure many in this room know him very well, was among the core advisors on this survey, extremely helpful. Sergio, take it away.
Thank you.